But in a world where a squirrel from Texas lives under the sea, and getting locked in a freezer takes you to whatever this is, and don't even mention the nightmare fuel of an episode Rock Bottom was, Squidward serves as the believable and even somewhat relatable character that grounds the nonsensical drama that happens in Bikini Bottom. But that's not even half of the story about this artistic cephalopod, because he may be a modern day Sisyphus. If you were to describe this cartoon character to a friend who's never seen SpongeBob before, if such a person even exists, how would you describe him? I'll give you a second. You good? If you're anything like me, you would most likely say someone arrogant, grumpy, snobby, or just straight up mean. Someone so delusional that they can't even recognize that they're horrible. This is probably the same impression a lot of people got from the show. In the episode Squidward, the Unfriendly Ghost, we can see the extent of his passion for the arts. He paints, sculpts, and does whatever this is. He expresses himself, that's for sure. But in all of the episodes where he showcases his talent, he's mocked and ridiculed for it. When he plays his clarinet, people jeer at him. When he dances, they empty the salad bar of their tomatoes. And when he sculpts, well, all of this seems to support the idea that he's just untalented, right? How can I then say that he's the modern day Sisyphus? For those of you unfamiliar with the Greek myth of Sisyphus, he was the king that was eternally punished for his crime of evading death and outwitting the gods. He was condemned to roll a boulder up a hill, but each time he neared the summit, the boulder would inevitably slip and roll back down, forcing him to begin his laborious task all over again. We now use the term Sisyphean to describe tasks that are endless, ineffective, or requires continuous effort. The term itself carries an underlying sense of futility. In his essay The Myth of Sisyphus, Albert Camus famously said that one must imagine Sisyphus happy. He likened the mythical king to humanity itself, as we endlessly toil in ultimately meaningless tasks. He argues that there is hope, that in the voluntary undertaking of an ultimately meaningless task, one can derive meaning as you embrace the absurdity of existence. Well, what if I tell you that Squidward's continued ridicule is also a cruel punishment devised by the gods, and that his sustained effort to hone his craft, despite the fact, is a show of proud defiance by the squid? I know what you're saying. The writers obviously intended to make him a gag character, right? What is there to look into? He was meant to be the butt of these jokes, to contrast SpongeBob's effortless talents and skills. Well, that's exactly it. The writers did put him in situations where he's made to be the butt of these jokes, but then Squidward refuses to see himself as one. Contrast this to Patrick, who don't mind being the punchline. Any lesser marine creature would just naturally give up, like in the episode Artist Unknown, where Squidward was made to teach a class on art. No one but SpongeBob showed up, so Squidward put him through a crash course on art, which of course SpongeBob promptly aced with his godlike talents. But Squidward was unimpressed and gave SpongeBob a bit of a hard time. Mind you, this was nowhere near what he himself has endured over the years. But in failing to impress his teacher, SpongeBob relegated himself to the dumps, saying,
"These hands weren't meant to create, they only destroy!"
One can see Squidward's sheer tenacity and refusal to be a gag character as an act of rebellion against the writers. Because to be like SpongeBob is to rely on innate talent and godly fortune. But to be like Squidward is to embark on a noble rebellion against fate itself. Nothing showcases this point better than Season 2, Episode 6, titled Squidville. If it's been a minute since you've watched the show, it was the episode where, tired of SpongeBob and Patrick's absurdity, in the most literal sense of that word, Squidward moved into Tentacle Acres. He initially enjoys the environment where everyone shares his interest and lifestyle. However, he soon finds the monotony and lack of individuality stifling. Watching this as a kid, I had always somewhat understood the message behind the episode. To not take what you have for granted, that the grass isn't always greener on the other side, or the importance of having fun and what the lack of it would do to a person. But I also remembered the acre giving me a bit of a sinister impression. That there was something vaguely scary about the Squidville episode, but I could never put my finger on it as a kid. But now, looking deeper into it, the episode carries a poignant message about the loss of identity and personal freedoms. This is where the parallel between Squidward and the existentialist concept of authenticity begins. Jean-Paul Sartre, an existentialist thinker, wrote that humans are condemned to be free because once thrown into the world, we are responsible for everything that we do, whether we accept it or not. To accept it is to live authentically. In other words, you yourself decide what to make of your life. As to let anything or anyone else decide that for you is a form of rejection of your inherent freedom. At the start of the episode, Squidward had initially rejected a life of freedom and the absurdity that it entails. Instead, he opted for a life of predictability and conformity in the acre. But in doing so, he later found himself confronted by the community's strict conformism. As when Squidward slightly steps out of line and exercised his free will by playing with the reef blower, the residents who's long relegated their individuality calls him childish for it. In Sartre's view, conforming to societal pressure, or in this case, letting your fellow residents dictate your daily lives, your interests, and who you are, is a form of rejection of your inherent freedom, or as he called it, living in bad faith. In realizing this, Squidward chose to live authentically. In his lucidity, he found a new perspective as he flies off to claim back his freedom. In his book The Idiot, Dostoevsky observed Podkolyosin, a fictional character written by Gogol. He said, by no means is he a non-existent character. Because how many intelligent people, after hearing of this Podkolyosin, immediately began to find that scores and even hundreds of their friends were exactly like him. He goes on to say that these typical characters exist and trot among us in real life, but in their diluted form. As a kid, I was admittedly laughing and pointing along with everyone else at Squidward, relishing in his inevitably spectacular failures. As an adult, I see Squidward a bit differently now, perhaps with my own life being on the brink of uncertainty, with my college graduation closing in on the horizon. It feels like I'm once again standing between the borders of a child and adulthood, a threshold I honestly thought I had crossed long ago. With new sets of eyes, I can see that Squidward was just a guy trying to make ends meet in his dead-end job as a cashier register. And even though he works crazy hour shifts, basically 7 days a week with very little pay, he still somehow finds the time to pursue his passion on the side, on the very slim chance that it does change his life. To end it here would be a disservice to my now favorite character. Because I argue that he clocks into the Krusty Krab just because he can, and that he plays the clarinet just because he wants to, and that he does art just for the sake of art itself, not for the money that we all know Krab isn't paying him, nor the social approval that's denied of him, but because the struggle itself is enough to fill a man's heart.